Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today I want to look at a game by our youngest state champion, Wolfe, a member of our Saturday Newtown Chess Club and a resident of New Milford. Miles is the same age as many of you, and he's a very good young player. This is a game he played from a recent tournament, not the elementary school championship, but a tournament a few months ahead of time. It was U.S. Chess Federation rated, and in this game he's playing the #1 player from the University of Connecticut team, or at least a player who played as the #1 board in the University of Connecticut team. So let's have a look at a game by our current 2020 Connecticut State Elementary School champion, Wolfe. Miles is white, and he opens the game e4. His opponent plays d6, d4. Again, Miles following the ABCs of chess, attacking the center with pawns. He's about to bring out his bishops and his knights, and he's going to castle in a relatively few moves. His opponent plays knight to f6. He plays knight to c3. Opponent plays g6. They're following text moves here. These are opening theoretical moves. His opponent is playing a defense called the Pirc, or the modern defense, P-I-R-C. They're playing theory, I mean, at this point, both of them. Both moves are fine. All the moves they're making are fine. There are other moves that they could make instead. Miles goes here. This is fine. Knight to f3 is fine. They're all interchangeable. They're good moves. a6, bishop to e3 for Miles. His opponent is getting ready to castle himself. Now Miles plays h4, which is a little different here. He's anticipating putting his queen on a d2 and castling queenside and attacking the king over here. So h4 is already a sign of a very aggressive move, and his opponent doesn't want him to get any thoughts of at some point playing g4 and then h5, pushing the pawn, opening the h-file. So his opponent doesn't want to let him do anything like that, and he plays h5 immediately. Miles goes on to develop his queen. Clearly Miles is going to castle, but castle queenside. As you can see, he's got everything off the back rank on the queen side. His opponent plays b5, trying to play b4, anticipating that Miles will castle queenside and start attacking over there, attacking Miles' king. And Miles proceeds ahead. This is a little risky, but he proceeds ahead to castle queenside, even though his opponent is getting ready to attack him. His opponent could play b4 here, which is probably a pretty strong move here. Instead, he chooses to fianchetto on the queen side the bishop. Nothing wrong with it, but maybe b4 is a little better. Miles plays f3. His opponent, let me back up for a minute here. His opponent threatens here to capture the e-pawn. He's attacking it twice. Miles only got it guarded once. So Miles chooses to guard it again. He sets up, Miles is setting up a pretty familiar formation of pieces, okay? B's on e2 and e3, queen's on d2, rook's d1, knight c3, castling queenside. This is a kind of a standard attacking idea for white in positions like this. But again, notice he's just developing pieces, got pieces out. His opponent plays knight and b to d7. He could castle here, but he's afraid of getting attacked over here. So he decides he's going to keep his king in the middle. Miles bringing out his other knight to h3. And black probably, even though he may have to face a move such as this, exchanging off the b's here, he should probably castle. Get his king out of the way. Remember the ABCs of chess. Don't play with the king in the middle of the board. Castle as soon as you can. Instead, he plays knight to b6. And Miles brings his knight strongly into play with knight to g5. It's going to be very hard to chase that knight out of that square. The h-pawn has advanced to h5, so it can't attack it. The f-pawn could attack it, but the knight's going to have to move out of the way, and if it ever happens, by playing f here, he's going to end up blocking in on g7, his own b anyway, so this is a very good move. Even though it doesn't really threaten to win anything because the king guards the pawn, perhaps at some point he may be able to start advancing these pawns and maybe advance a pawn into here. It's some point. So knight to g5 is a nice move. His opponent does play b4. Okay, an aggressive move, attacking Miles' knight. Miles only has one realistic square for it. He could play it to here, but he will lose a pawn. If we look at the captures, knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and then knight takes knight again, winning a pawn. So Miles doesn't want to lose a pawn. He plays knight back to b1, which is a defensive move. It's the only good square for the knight. It's a defensive move. Helps provide a little more protection around the king. His opponent plays a5. He's going to try to push his pawns and open up a file here. And Miles now plays e5, attacking in the middle of the board. Probably the best line, the best move for black here is to take the pawn. And then Miles doesn't want to lose a pawn, so he would have to take the pawn. And black can get the queens off the board and maybe then castle safely. This is probably what black should play here. Instead, he makes a questionable move. He plays his knight on f to d5. He sees that, of course, he's got to move his knight out of the way. But I think where me as black, I would have chosen to open a file. So knight on f to d5. And now Miles makes a very good move here, which really turns the game in his favor. He plays e6, a pawn coming right into the throat of black's game, and emphasizing why we want to castle early. The king is now caught in the middle of the board. The threat is pawn takes pawn check, where the knight guards the pawn. And if black chooses to take the pawn, then Miles would play knight takes pawn, attacking the queen and attacking over here the bishop, which is unguarded. He would win something. So that's a very, very strong move. And if his opponent plays f6, Miles would then play knight into f7, forking both the queen and the rook, and he would have to win a more valuable piece for a less valuable one. Black would undoubtedly move his queen out of the way, maybe to c8, maybe to b8. It's only two choices. And then Miles could simply take the rook, winning in exchange a rook for a knight. So this is already a turning point in the game. e6 is a key move that Miles found, and his opponent plays here. Bishop to h6. So he's hoping for a move like knight takes pawn. And of course, if we look ahead, we would see that then he would be able to take Miles' bishop on e3, and the knight would guard it, and he would actually win Miles' queen, because the Miles' queen would be pinned against his king. So his opponent is trying to play tricky here, hoping that Miles will make a mistake. But of course, all Miles really has to do is take the pawn with check and not capture the knight. And that's what Miles plays. Pawn takes pawn check. The king can't recapture, of course, because the knight guards it. Now the king must move. The king must move, and he cannot castle. If the king moves here, do we see what move Miles would play? Looking for a knight fork, of course. Miles would play knight to e6 check, winning the queen, forking the two. So black has one real move, king to d7, and that's the move he makes. Otherwise, he will lose his queen to a knight fork. Miles finds what I think is a very good move here. He's going to try to open the game, get some files open on the king. He plays c4. Now, even though his own king is here, he's got enough protection around it, and he's going to try to get to the black king. Now, of course, black could capture the pawn in passing, en passant. We haven't looked too much at this in classes, but this is a move that does happen once in a while. Again, if a pawn moves two squares past its opposite number on the next move only by his opponent, you can take the pawn as though it only moved one square, following the en passant, the in-passing rule in chess. This is a rule that does not occur too often, but when it does, it can be key. And this is probably what black should play. He should probably capture Miles' pawn in passing, forcing Miles would then probably take using his knight here. But this is what he should do. Instead, first of all, his knight's being attacked. Instead, he makes a curious move. He moves his pawn to c6, allowing Miles simply to capture a knight, which is hard to understand, and why someone would lose a piece for nothing when there's no reason to. So Miles captures his knight, winning his knight. He retakes with the pawn, and now it gives Miles a nice check as well over here. So Miles has won a piece. His king is somewhat exposed here, and he may have to give the piece back to knight here at some point with a check on the file. But right now, his opponent is the one in check. And he chooses to try to exchange off pieces here. He blocks the check, and Miles takes check. Of course, the only choice black has is he must recapture with his king. So we've reached another curious position of sorts where both kings are sort of facing each other in a middle game with the queens and rooks on the board. It doesn't happen very often. Kind of an interesting little look on the chessboard. Miles now plays knight to e6, centralizing his knight, making an attacking move, attacking the queen. At some point, when this moves, maybe playing pawn here, winning an exchange. So a very good move. He could also have played queen here, with the idea of maybe playing queen at some point into the game here, controlling some white squares, but knight here is a very good choice as well. And his opponent moves his queen out of the way, playing queen to c8, threatening a king move and a discovered check on the file, forcing Miles to lose his knight because he would have no squares for his king. He doesn't, of course, if it was a queen check, he could interpose his queen too. But knight to e6, queen here. Miles now plays queen to c2 check, getting his queen out in the file, making an escape square if he ever needs it for his king, so he doesn't have to give back a pawn. But he's got to watch out that this is now unguarded here. So one little thing for Miles to watch out for. King to here, and now Miles, seeing that he's got a piece unguarded, he captures the bishop. Okay. His opponent could recapture back. Rook takes the bishop. He could take the queens, but he chooses to capture the knight instead here. So now Miles is still a piece ahead. He does have a piece that's being attacked, it's unguarded. He has to do something about it. He has to watch out for a rook check on the file, or a rook move on the file, pinning the queen to the king, forcing him to give back the knight here. So his opponent is starting to come back a little bit. But the game is taking a very interesting turn at this point. Miles pushes the pawn now, since black is no longer controlling the square with the exchanged off bishop, the b that was here. Miles can now queen the pawn, pushes the pawn and queen, is protected by his own b, makes a new queen here. And his opponent, of course, captures it with his rook. Miles recaptures it back. Now, his opponent should probably play a move like queen check here. Okay, forcing Miles to do something to block it maybe. And now rook check here, and he could win back the piece here. Because again, pawn takes knight. This is what he should probably have played here. Instead, his opponent captures the piece on f8, and Miles plays rook on h to e1. Okay, attacking the queen. Queen goes queen to f6. So Miles is now an entire rook ahead here. If we count the pieces, we stop for a moment. Miles has got two rooks. Opponent has one, and on a rook check, at some point Miles doesn't have, well, rook pinning, rook here would force Miles again to give back a piece, but he'd still be in exchange ahead. So Miles is winning by material on the board. I also think his game is a little better as well. Black has secured a little bit of comfort for his king, but being a rook down is very difficult. It's a lot of material. Okay, so Miles plays queen at e2 at this stage. He's going to give back the knight. He's conceded that a rook check will force him to block with his knight, giving back the knight, but he will still have a rook for a knight in the end when all is said and done. The opponent does play rook check, and Miles does block with his knight. So after pawn takes knight, he will still have a rook for basically a knight. Now, let's see. Okay. At this point, Miles had played queen e2 a move before. I'm sorry, I missed a move. After queen to f6, Miles played queen to e2, rook to c8, knight to c3, and now he plays rook to c7, which is probably the best move. The knight's not going anywhere, it's pinned, and he doesn't want to allow queen takes pawn check. So his opponent guards the e pawn twice, otherwise it was only guarded once. He'd have to exchange queens, and he'd just be into a losing ending, a knight for only a rook. So Miles moves out of the way, and his opponent now finally takes the knight, pawn takes knight, and Miles recaptures pawn takes pawn. Opponent again could play rook takes pawn here, but Miles would get queen takes pawn check down here, exchanging queens. So his opponent plays queen at f5 check, king to a1. Now he plays queen at d7, trying to consolidate the best he can. He's an exchange down here. Miles has a rook for a knight on open files with the heavy pieces. This is going to win, but Miles has to be careful here. His opponent can still put up a pretty staunch defense for a long time. Miles plays queen at b2, pinning the knight against the king. Maybe he wants to bring his rook over and attack. Opponent plays king to a6, trying to get out of the pin, and Miles does play rook to b1. Now he's attacking the knight. The threat is simply queen takes knight. He's attacking it twice. Black only has it protected once. So Black must do something about his knight here, either move it or guard it. He chooses to move it out of the way, which is a good move. It attacks Miles's queen, also threatens knight or rook takes pawn here, so it does two things at once. It's a double attacking move. The black knight attacks the queen and attacks the pawn because he has the rook also guarding the pawn. So knight to a4, and it takes away the threat of losing it here, and he's still stopping any possible checks here. The rook and queen stop any possible checks here, of course. Now, perhaps a good check here, looking for checks again when our queen is being attacked. Maybe queen check here is possibly a very strong move here. Looks good to me, at least. King here, maybe, and then rook here. Threatening rook takes pawn check, followed probably by more checks on the file from the rook. Maybe even bringing the queen. This will be a very devastating game. This is a very strong game at this point for white. So certainly queen at e2 check comes into consideration as a good move. But Miles comes up with a move that, quite honestly, when I saw this game the first time, I had not looked at. But this is a computerized move, and it's kind of a shocking move when you see it, as most computerized moves are, actually. When you see them for the first time, you're not really expecting them. Miles comes up with rook takes e7. Look at this move. A shocking move. You wonder, wow, why can't he take the rook here check? Well, if he takes the rook here check, let's see what can happen to him here. He should probably just have captured the queen. But so his opponent, in fact, takes the rook. Takes the rook off the board here. King is, let's make sure we have the king placed right here. King is actually here. Okay, and he plays, Miles plays queen check. Opponent plays here, and of course, mate in one, which you all should see, is queen here. That the game actually ended with you're repeating moves once. Miles ended up playing queen here. He played queen here, king here, and then queen here, mate. But very interesting mate here. Very shocking move. I think perhaps his opponent was more shocked by the move, and which is why he captured it. So rook takes e7, queen to e7, and then Miles plays queen check, and of course king here, mate in one would end the game. as I said, what really happened, we repeated one more time, and then Miles played here, and his opponent resigned at this point. A very nice little game by Miles, and the moral of the story here, once again, is when you can castle early, castle early. Get your king out of the middle of the board, get your king to safety, follow the ABCs of chess. But a very fine game by our current 2020 elementary school champion, Miles Wolfe, who I'm proud to say is a member of our Saturday Newtown Chess Club as well. And it clearly shows that Miles is going to see captures and checks. He understands tactics, which is what the game is about. He sees the captures and the checks. And remember, he's the age of many of you who are watching this now. So there's hope. There's hope for all of you. Thank you for watching. Once again, you remember to castle, remember to look for your captures and checks, and I'll see you next time in our video.